Welcome to the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Sulon Carrick and I'm passionate about inspiring, motivating, supporting and informing women over 50 to embrace this exciting time of life. Health and wellness in mind, body and spirit are the foundations for living well, but there is so much more to a life well lived. Each week, through conversations with my guests, I'll be presenting topics that will help us all to live well and enjoy life. So join me as we discover new ways to become women living well after 50. Are you ready to start living? What are you waiting for? Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Sulon Carrick and it's lovely to have you join me. Are you an overthinker? I know I am at times. And my guest today, Rosemary Gattuos, is also a self-proclaimed chronic overthinker. She's always been curious about how other people manage their daily challenges. Studying law, Rosemary soon learned it wasn't a career for her. Instead, she was drawn to mediation, using a model that moved away from the us versus them to we, replacing blame and fault with collaboration. She became a family dispute resolution practitioner, otherwise known as a family mediator for the Family Court of Australia. In her book, It's Not You, It's Me, Rosemary outlines the scales of self-reflection, along with troubleshooting hints and practical ways to use the scales. There are also reflection tasks in each chapter. She hopes the book will be a stepping stone towards increasing self-awareness and transforming negative self-talk into empowering personal growth and resilience, the ability to bounce back, reflect, and learn from our challenges and mistakes. So let's go and join the conversation. Welcome, Rosemary. It's so lovely to have you join me on the Women Living Well After 50 podcast.
Hi, Sue. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, now you've written a book, It's Not You, It's Me, a Chronic Overthinker's Guide to Self-Reflection, and I'm really enjoying reading the book. I haven't quite finished it yet, but I love the way that you've got reflection tasks at the end of each chapter. And we're going to be talking about the book a little bit more. But what I would like to do is to start with you just telling the listeners a little bit about your background and what inspired you to make a shift from law to doing a different type of work.
Oh, that sounds good. And it's probably a good place to start as well, because it gives extra meaning to what I propose in my book and how I got there. And for many years, even while I was at school, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to study law and I wanted to work with families. It was just something that felt natural for me, and I was always drawn to that. And that was really the only part of the legal system that really interested me. And it became quite obvious while I was studying that my personality and my approach didn't really match the traditional legal system, but I still did it. And I guess what I found is that even once I started practicing for a short time, that the legal system and working as a solicitor or a lawyer, it really highlighted my weaknesses and what I wasn't so good at. But it was also during my final placement that I had to do a compulsory mediation component. And that was the first time I really felt drawn to a process that made sense and highlighted my strengths and my sort of natural approach and way of being, I guess. So that really planted the seed earlier on to seek out ways to help people resolve disputes outside of the traditional legal setting. And so that's really, once I finished my studies and started practicing, I did all I could to get into mediation or an alternative dispute resolution. And I guess once I did, and it was a massive personal and professional change for me, because I was in a role that highlighted my strengths, which was very different to my previous roles that really highlighted my weaknesses or where I needed to improve or change or even be like someone else. So yeah, that's quite a distinct mark in my career. And even my sense of self and confidence and ability to believe in myself. It kind of, even though it was a professional move, a career change, it had such intense personal growth, that came along with it.
And even the ability to have that self-awareness where you think, oh, well, I've studied law and I've decided this isn't quite the area that I want to be in. A lot of people tend to stay somewhere because they feel that security or they fear the change. But you sort of decided that, you were introduced to an area that you thought, yes, this is me. And so you did something about it and pursued that so that you did grow because you overcame any fears. Your self-confidence probably grew. And when we're doing something that we feel we're drawn to and we enjoy, that just makes our whole life so much better, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's also a case of when we find ourselves in a situation that isn't working for us, where we are uncomfortable. I for several years I worked for one of the biggest shopping centre developers in Australia, if not the world, and I really hated it. I mean, I hated it but it didn't fit well with me. It wasn't where I wanted to be. That's what it was. I mean, I could do the work. There was nothing wrong with it. It was a great organization to work for. But I'd be just really sad about going to work. And that's not how it should be. I mean, we don't have to completely love our work, but we don't. But to be so depressed about it, is not a good sign. And that's where it's about learning from actually what's not working for us, because that will, even if we don't know where to go or where we have to go. I mean, in my case, I was quite specific. I always wanted to work with families and in family law. I just wasn't really clear on how to do that until I got to where I didn't want to be. And then the pieces sort of started to move together. But it shouldn't be that uncomfortable and that depressing or upsetting for us to just go to work.
No, because when you're in, at your stage of your career, that takes up most hours of the day, doesn't it? So if you're so unhappy all that time out of a day, it's going to affect you in your life outside of the work environment as well. And then, you just sort of plodding along each day, dragging yourself around, and really we need to be getting the most out of life, not sort of just putting up with what we think we have to do.
That's right.
Yeah. So what I want to do is tell me, you made that career shift and obviously you enjoyed that. So why did you then write the book, It's Not You, It's Me, A Chronic Overthinker's Guide to Self-Reflection?
Well, for many years, even before I became a family mediator, I always had an idea. I always wanted to write a book. And I was writing short stories on and off for many years. And so I don't know, I guess it was always something on my list of things that I wanted to do. And it wasn't really until I reached a point where there were a lot of changes in my life, and I felt that I had a lot to write about because of those changes. And also, there was a writers' competition that had that where if you won if you could enter your work into this writers' competition, and if you were chosen, you would get a publishing contract. That was the prize, a publishing contract with one of the biggest self-help publishers in the world. And so that gave me a deadline, because I'd been writing for probably 10 years. And then I had this, well, I had to be done by I think it was in November or December one year. And so that got me to just get it out and write it and submit it. But at that stage, it was still a fiction. It was a story about a chronic overthinker and her challenges and what she did and what worked for her. And then the last chapter of the book was a self-help book based on the main character.
Oh, right. Okay.
And so when after submitting this, I didn't win the publishing contract, but I asked for feedback, and I was essentially told that I have to choose: do I want to write a fiction or a non-fiction? So at that point, I rewrote the last chapter as an entire book.
Oh, okay. Yes, yes. And I suppose I can understand that you've really got to have one or the other. You can have a fiction book with some themes coming through it that, people can learn from, but that is distinct from the non-fiction where it's more of a guide or an opportunity to provide more inspiration. Now, you've said yourself you're a chronic overthinker, and I know I am too. And I just, it's never too late to change. But what are some things that you do to help with that overthinking and second guessing yourself and just coming to make a decision on what you need to do?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the main ways to help overcome overthinking is simply awareness and that reflection, and learning from the times when we did get stuck in that spiral of overthinking and making assumptions and catastrophizing and just thinking the worst case scenario about everything without it, with limited evidence. Because if we can be aware of it and reflect on it, that's where we're going to be able to learn from it and grow personally. It's that's really the biggest thing. And whether or not that is, some people like to write. If you're someone that likes to journal, then you can journal about it. If just having that awareness, like I know that in my book I use the strengths-based theory, which classifies all thoughts, feelings, and actions, or in any situation, as either what's wrong and what's strong. So sometimes just having that awareness, like, the other day I was walking down the street and I was thinking about a situation. It was just very trivial, but it suddenly occurred to me that all the thoughts in my head were focusing on what's wrong in that situation. And I just thought, oh, I have to reread my book, because and it's so easy to go down that path. But then in that moment, and it was something very, very trivial, but just having that awareness, I automatically stopped and I thought, okay, this is this is not necessary. It's not major. Let's take a different approach, or just let it go for now. So that awareness is super important. And I mean, in my book, I sort of propose ways to build on this working through situations through the what's wrong and the what's strong lens. And one approach or one practice, that strategy that I propose, which is based on my legal background, is about using the rules of evidence to help tame overthinking. And essentially, the rules of evidence in law, they cover what can be used as evidence in a court proceeding. So if it can't be submitted in evidence, then why are we spending so much time on it? And what we spend so much time on that is inadmissible are things that can't be verified by a witness or a thing. So, assumptions, opinions, jumping to conclusions, all those thoughts that we have that then lead to increased anxiety. They might even stop us from taking action because we've already thought of the worst case scenario, or what someone else is thinking. And that's all these types of thinking. And it stops us. It stops us, prevents, or we even take action to prevent a harm that really exists only in our thought. So when we're having those types of thoughts, if we just think about, well, is it admissible in court? Can it be verified by a witness? Can it be verified by a document or a thing? then, and if the answer is no, then perhaps we should really revisit how much weight we put on it and the impact, because it's not just about how much weight we put, but then what we do with that and how much that changes our approach. And this this really came through to me once when I really jumped to negative conclusions about a situation. I don't even remember the details. I just remember the realization I had afterwards. And so I made a negative assumption about a person, and then maybe a month or two later, I received this information. I was privy to information that I didn't have when I made that assumption, and it really just disproved what I was thinking, and quite extreme. And I thought, oh, wow, I really got upset about that situation. And it wasn't even true, So, and then I thought, well, how many times do I not get that additional information? So I don't know. And I just live in this negative assumption about a situation or a person and take steps, and it's all inadmissible. So when it's, when we're relying on something that would be otherwise inadmissible in court, then that's a clue that firstly we're overthinking, and that perhaps we should revisit how much weight we put on it and we give it.
Because when you start to overthink, you do get carried away, don't you? And your emotions come into it, and you're not actually thinking clearly. You start to just focus on, as you say, the negatives, which may or may not be true. So I like that idea about thinking, well, if I was in court, would this be admissible? And if it isn't, why am I wasting my time on it? It's about probably taking that time to stop and say, turn the brain off for a minute, and what actually is the issue, and finding the facts about it. But because we let emotion come into it and we get the anxiety and the stress, it really blurs all our thinking, and we just don't think clearly.
That's right. And then biologically, we're more primed or have a predisposition to expect the worst and to look out for the worst and to remember the worst case scenario. And in some cases, the science is showing that some of these thoughts that we are having, like negative comparison or even being, can feel like physical pain, very similar to physical pain for us. So that's why these thoughts are so heavy. But one way that I really encourage to help counteract that and to really start to change the structure of the brain is a meditation practice. And not just but a consistent. And even though sometimes it's quite hard, and you might sit down for 10 minutes and there might only be 2 minutes where in total of that time where the mind is clear of clutter, and that's fine, because it's more about consistency. If you keep it up on a regular basis, then you're going to get that benefit from those 2 minutes, and that 2 minutes might increase and become easier. And also, and when it's not working, that's a sign to maybe do something different, because it's the same as physical exercise. If we do the same physical routine every day, we get bored, we get sick of it, our muscles sort of get tight. Try something different. And what happens over time with consistent and regular meditation is that it's going to make the parts of the brain that will go towards that worry and the anxiety, it will sort of tone those parts down, while build up the parts that will actually help the reflective process and emotional regulation.
I remember, a number of years ago now, I'd never really done meditation, so I thought I'd do an online course, or it was, I think it was a month of meditation or something. And I found it so difficult, because every time I went to, practice, my mind just, for some reason, just started to fill with everything, and it was a real monkey mind. And I really struggled with that month, and I thought, oh, isn't for me, until I don't know what, I was listening to something else a bit later, and they said, when you meditate, it's okay to have thoughts come in. sit with them and then just put them aside. And that just changed everything because, as you said, you might be there for 10 minutes and perhaps only be able to have that focus for 2 minutes on clearing your mind. But it with practice, it will improve because you start to be able to understand, well, this thought's coming in, so I'll just let it come and
Mm.
pass through, and that's okay, rather than going, oh, my mind's filling up again, I've got to meditate, I've got to meditate. And, it just sort of snowballs after that. So that was something that I picked up and really helped me in understanding what meditation was about.
Yeah, because otherwise it's almost impossible to just start as a new meditator to have a
Mm.
clear mind. And often sometimes what I do when the thoughts come in, I just have a broom, visualize a broom sweeping them out. And
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Mm.
sometimes
Mm.
that can help, or I staying with the kind of idea of visualization is that I'll have an image in my mind, and it could be something as simple or easy as a fruit or an object or something that there's not much sort of emotional reaction to or response, and just focus on that.
Mm. Mm. So, in your book, you talk about the scales of self-reflection, and is that the what's wrong and what's strong, or is that something different altogether?
Yes, it's based on the idea of everything being categorized under what's wrong and what's strong. And the scales then build on that to give specific examples of what that might look like in life.
Hmm. So, can we talk about a couple of examples
Sure.
about what that might look like?
Yeah. And it's really about using opposites to help, I guess, categorize and reflect on what's happening. And these are almost like the trends that I noticed in mediation. And this is where they initially sort of stood out to me, because I could see that in one mediation room with one set of couples or parents would approach this way and they would get this outcome. In the next room, very similar situation, but the approach would be different and they would get a different or slower approach. So, the first one I'll go through is judgment and understanding. So we have on the and if you sort of see it as a T intersection where you've got to choose, do I go left or do I go right? And one path will be the path of what's wrong. And as we go down that path, we get more evidence to support that narrative. But the opposite side is the what's strong path. And again, as we walk down that path, we collect more evidence of what's strong and the benefits or even the learning, because even if things don't go as planned, there's always a lesson from that. So then, we have judgment and understanding, because when we are in a situation and we are showing judgment, then we're moving away from showing understanding. And
Mm. Mm.
so the judgment is the what's wrong, and the understanding is what we'd be doing when we're going towards what's strong.
Mm.
And
Mm.
that's, something that is judgment is quite big in overthinking,
Yes.
because they are judgmental thoughts that generally focus on what's wrong.
Mm. Mm. And I don't know if it's a natural thing, but a lot of people do tend to jump to the judgmental side rather than just taking a moment to get all the facts and perhaps finding that understanding. Judgmental about other people and what they do as well as ourselves. Because, I notice on um, social media that something will come up and there's a lot of negativity and judging when people
Mm.
haven't either taken the time to read the post properly. So they've gone off half cocked with, the wrong information and they're giving their 2 cents worth and they're judging and they're not sort of trying to understand what that other person is going through. And, that's something that I think we apply to ourselves as well. We're quick to judge ourselves and what we're doing wrong rather than looking at, okay, what am I doing right? This isn't even about thinking about an issue or something. It's about ourselves, I suppose, the way we view ourselves. We could look at it as what's wrong and find everything negative about the person we are, or we can look at what our strengths are. Going back to what you did in your change of career, you found that when you were doing law, that it wasn't playing to your strengths. You weren't using your strengths, and so that prompted you to probably review those and then go down the new path where you were much happier. So it is about, I think, looking at ourselves and what our strengths and weaknesses are, which is a little bit different, I suppose, to the topic we're talking about, but it does tie in.
Well,
And
yeah,
we judge
definitely.
ourselves, yeah, and we probably judge ourselves a lot harsher than what we do other people.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because even, in my book, everything that I propose is something is, a way or a lens to view not only how we interact with the external others and situations, but also with ourselves, because they
Mm,
all feed on each other. And the more we are able to see our own strengths, then the more we're able to see the strengths in others, or to show more understanding and less judgment. And it's kind of looped in, because if we are impacted by others when we go on social media, then it could be that perhaps we are seeing their strengths on the screen, and the implication is that we have something wrong, that we're not as good, and
mm,
that's the real cause of that reaction.
mm,
I mean,
mm,
yes, there are posts and things that really aggravate us, that get to us, and they're normally things that go towards our values and
mm,
morals, and our belief system. But
mm.
when it's just something about someone going on a holiday or buying a car or whatever, something quite um, mundane, or then it's like, well, it's triggered something in us because of our view of ourselves.
Yes, and that comparison trap that we fall into. I mean, social media, I think it's great in its place, and but other times some people, you only see the perfect side of life, and life's not like that. I think most of us understand that, but it is easy to fall into that comparison trap. And I'm thinking that perhaps if you are an overthinker, you do that a lot more than, because it comes back to probably not having the self-confidence in yourself.
Yeah, because and I see that self-confidence, sense of self-esteem as how much we believe in ourselves. And
Mm,
when our belief in ourselves is quite solid, then we're not as impacted by what others are doing. But then, just to draw back on the neurobiology, is that comparing us negative comparisons to others also activate a network in our brain that is very similar to the feeling of physical pain. It's that emotional pain, that it's physical pain, but it's very similar to the how we respond to physical pain. So that kind of gives added meaning to why these comparisons can be so impactful, because it feels like a physical wound.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and I hadn't thought about it or heard about it actually, but it is a big thing, the comparison trap, and that can just affect us in so many ways. So the other thing I was thinking of too, from an overthinker's point of view, is trying to, like, for example, if you've got an issue that you really need to talk to someone about, rather than just sort of getting in there and having a conversation, you tend to build and build and build it up, keep it inside until you feel like you're going to burst. And then, of course, the outcome isn't as good, because you probably blow up, or you come out with something that isn't true. So how do you sort of approach that when you've got to talk to someone about perhaps something that isn't quite a pleasant topic, or
Yeah.
you really need to have a discussion? How do you approach that?
Well, I think that's a good point, because it's really important to connect with people, services, professionals who are going to help you focus on your strengths. So, if you look at, mental health practitioners, there's so many different options available. And sometimes it's also a matter of finding someone you connect with and finding someone that you feel understands where you're coming from. And that might not be the first person you go to. So I guess my first thing is don't give up, and keep looking until you do find someone that works with you. I guess the proviso there is that sometimes we can get so stuck that no one is going to be that perfect fit, and because we're just not ready, and we don't want someone who will be able to help us because we're quite comfortable in that space. And that's okay too, because it has to be the right time. But in terms of things that will help our overthinking, there's sort of traditional and non-traditional categories of self-care and mental health, and even having sometimes a business mentor or a coach that can also help, because sometimes we might be overthinking, our professional life and what to do next, or we just need someone to bounce off. So it's also about, using consultants, coaches, mentors, anyone, even, professional associations. They're often a good place to start to seek out, referrals or suggestions as to where to start, if that's, an element. And then in terms of, there's also things that sort of come under physical sort of self-care, like massage, or, even going for a walk in nature, or going to the beach, or so it's about looking at from a bigger picture. It's not just sitting on a couch and talking to someone.
No,
it can be, but it could also be yoga, or it could also, be some kind of movement, or even a practice that looks at movement, or, there's so many different methods now that look at how to process unprocessed trauma and heal, because essentially what happens is, when we have unprocessed trauma, is that we keep making repeat patterns in our lives that stop us from moving forward in certain areas. Maybe in some we're okay, but in certain areas we'll have the same scenario play out again and again and again. It doesn't have to be drastic. It doesn't have to be that we experienced trauma or abuse. We just had an experience that really diminished our sense of self and has stayed with us, and made our ability to believe in ourselves in that part of our life a bit more challenging. And so that's where having some assistance or methods that help us focus on what's strong in ourselves, because then that will build on our sense of self and how much we believe in ourselves.
And I think that's a good point you made, even though you sort of referred to a business coach, but even a life coach, or someone who isn't immediately associated within your circle, because sometimes you can get so caught up in everything, and even people around you will either be telling you what they think you want to hear, or I think that having someone who is not directly involved can give you a much more balanced opinion or thought, and you might be thinking about all these things, and they can give you the clarity and say, stop, this is you're thinking all these things, but let's just brush that away. And they can bring up from an independent perspective, without any emotion involved.
And that's a really good point, because I find often with my clients going through separation that, their family and friends are going to be their biggest fan, but they're also going to be the ones who might add fuel to the situation, because they want the best. They want the best, for their friend or their daughter or their sister or their cousin going through quite a challenging separation. So, and that's comforting, but it doesn't help the personal growth. It doesn't help going through the grief and loss process all the time. So it's about connecting with the people who won't focus on and spend too much time on what's wrong in that situation, but they will help you get through it and see your own strengths.
And it's a little bit too like if you want to make change in life, you usually find that you've either got full support from certain friends and family, but there will always be some who sort of try to bring you back down to earth with the best intentions, but I think it's more because they're afraid that you're going to change and they probably don't want you to because they're comfortable with the way you are and the relationship they have, or they might feel pressured to make changes that they don't want to make either. So that's why having someone to talk to about some, if you want to make major changes in life, having someone independent would give you the strength, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And then if you find that, certain people that you talk to in your circles do add doubt, then, I guess it can be challenging, but maybe reconsider who you then approach. And if that means going outside to that independent and not relying on family or friends. And I guess the flip side of that is that when we have a strong sense of self, then the doubt of others doesn't impact us as much. But at the same time, when we're going through a transition or a grief and loss, or we're sort of looking at making major changes and decisions in our lives, then that's where perhaps the belief in ourselves can be diminished because we consider everything that might happen, and it's not always going to be good. So if we can sort of eliminate the doubt of others, it helps eliminate our own doubt, but also, work on ourselves so that we are able to then have the approach of, well, if it's a mistake, then I'll learn from it. And then we see a mistake as a learning opportunity rather than a reason to beat ourselves up.
And sometimes within our circle, you have to make difficult decisions to perhaps remove someone from your circle if they just can't get on board, because there's always someone who, if you've got that person in your life, they're pulling you down, they're never your cheerleader, and you think sometimes, why have I got them in my life, but I don't know how to sort of remove them. But sometimes you have to make those choices, don't you? Because if they're not filling your cup, if they're being a toxic relationship, you just need to remove yourself from that, don't you? No matter how hard it is.
And I think what happens, and what I've seen in my own scenarios over the years, is that we tend to attract or gravitate towards people and situations that actually match the way we view ourselves. But then we change, we grow, and perhaps our belief in ourselves elevates, whereas some people around us still have the way we used to see ourselves as the way that they see us. That's the lens that they view us. And that's where we find that we're not getting on with people who we used to, be with almost every day and do everything with and share everything with, because our sense of self, how much we believe in ourselves, has changed, but they haven't. And it's not about them changing, but them acknowledging or seeing that our sense of self has changed, or believing that, they just don't believe in us.
Yeah, and the other thing is that they fear too, if you they may think they've got a bit more control over you. If you start to have that self-belief and you start to change and get stronger, their control is lessened, and so that becomes an issue as well. So I think it's all about doing what you think is right for yourself, and really being authentic in who you are and having the courage to do that. And I think courage is very a big part of things, having that courage to acknowledge where you're at and where you might want to be, and then trying to overcome those fears to get you there.
That's right. And even the courage to look in the face of our mistakes
Mm, mm.
and not
That's
let
exactly
that
right.
stop us or be a block, just to acknowledge it and see, well, how can we use that in the future?
Mm, mm. And I suppose I just wanted to ask you one thing. We're sort of getting on in the conversation now, and we'll be closing soon. But what about thinking about what the worst case scenario is? Does that not work for overthinkers because that's taking us down the what's wrong? Or, some people say, oh, I'm going to do this, and I think, well, what's the worst that can happen? Um,
Mm.
what do you think about that
Well, I
phrase?
guess that could go either way, because if you
Yeah,
say, well, what's the worst that can happen? No one's going to die.
yeah,
No,
I
no
think,
one's
yeah,
going to, there's no mate, and sort of have that approach. But then it's also, well, the worst that could happen is I could lose a lot of money,
yeah.
or I embarrass myself,
Mm.
or, I have an
I think
accident.
And I think that point you made, I always remember when I was working somewhere and this younger lass said, "What's the work?" And she'd really mucked up and made a mistake, and it was quite big. And she said, "Oh, well, what's the worst that can happen? No one died." And I thought,
Mm,
well, that's true. We place so much importance on things, but at the end of the day, it's something that can usually be fixed, or if not, well, we just have to live with it. But we're all still here. We've all still got our lives, and I think that's sort of a positive way to look at it from my point of
mm,
view, because that really is the worst case scenario. So if that hasn't happened, it can't be that bad.
yeah. And I think
Okay.
sometimes we also look at what other people will think.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And
That's a
that's,
big issue. Yeah.
and I guess what I've noticed is people have short memories. I mean, generally, um, yeah. And we look at, there's something in the media, and then next week there's something else takes over, and no one's interested. And I mean, that's quite maybe a superficial way to look at it, but it's also, when we worry about what other people are thinking, then we're also assuming that everyone is interested in our lives,
That's true. And that's a good
and
way
they're
to
going
think
to
about
be
it too. Yeah.
looking at, and well, maybe they'll be interested in it for a day when the news comes out, and then they're going to have something else to worry about.
Yeah. Next week they'll be looking at someone else and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So yeah, that's another good point too. So look, I've got one more question, but before I ask you that, it's one that I always ask my guests. But I just wondered if there's anything more that you wanted to just raise before we close. Are there any, say, the three things that someone could do today that would stop them from the overthinking,
Mm. Well, I think that
carousel that we get on?
the main thing is the awareness of whether or not our thoughts are going down the path of what's wrong and what's strong, and even just reflecting on past situations, because then you can see how one thought leads to another, which leads to another, and it just then builds our entire narrative of that situation. But there's a lot of lessons that we can take from that,
Mm,
and then perhaps using this idea of opposites, because what's wrong and what's strong are opposites of each other. So when we're going down the path of judgment, we're moving away from understanding. When we're going down the road of criticism, we're moving away from respect. So then how can we then in future show respect or show some understanding? What can we do differently for that? And it's always going to be towards our external stimulus, I say, whether or not it's others or situations, and also to ourselves.
yes, I was just going to say that about the criticism. As I said before, there's a lot of self-criticism that happens. So anything that you are applying to externally can be applied to you yourself as well. So that's something for us all to work on, I think. So, look, it's been lovely having a chat to you today, Rosemary, and you've come up with some really um, not well, simple's not quite the word, but you know what I mean, like things
It's a
that
word
we
that I
can
use.
do. Yeah,
Yeah,
things that we can do that, if we are overthinkers, we don't need anything too complicated because we've got enough going on in our mind anyway.
that's right.
And as I said, I loved in your book you had troubleshooting hints, you had reflection tasks at the end of each chapter, so it was quite interactive, which is good because we can read a book such as yours and really go, oh, yeah, okay, and then put it away. Whereas if you take the time to do the tasks, it really reinforces the message that you're trying to give to us all. And so I really would encourage people to get the book and to try that because and to give it the time because that's the other thing I don't think we do with self-reflection is give ourselves enough time. We tend to sort of just push it aside rather than taking the time for that self-reflection.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. And that was really my intention to give, bite-sized, ways to then, I guess, integrate the concepts into the reader's own life and situation. It's self-paced, it's self-guided, it's, aimed at you being able to put in your own scenarios in the situation.
No, it's really great. And I'll be putting all of the links in the show notes anyway for you. So just before we go, I just wanted to ask you, what does being a woman living well mean to you?
I think it means balance and being aware when we're going off or when I'm going off balance and then taking action to then realign. I guess that's a big thing for me at the moment, balance.
Yeah, I think it is for everyone. Well, thanks so much for joining me, Rosemary. It's been delightful chatting to you and a good reminder to us all, especially our overthinkers here, on what we can do to help ourselves, looking at not doing the what's wrong, but doing the what's strong in when we're thinking about things. So thanks again, and it was really great to chat to you.
Thanks, Sue. It was great chatting today.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of uh, A Chronic Overthinker's Guide to Self-Reflection with Rosemary Gattuos. Rosemary brought up some really good points and ways that we can handle those times when we just fall into that overthinking trap. So that's it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it and that you've got some good takeaways from it and that you'll also share it with a friend. So until next time, remember to live well, enjoy life, and most of all, be a woman living life your way. Bye for now.